Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the very first Temple Bar Trust online talk in the brand new autumn season. I'm Lucy Bullivant, a trustee, and since July of last year, not this year, I've curated the Trust's online series of talks. And you can, if you haven't already, you can see the whole entire wealth of talk videos and films, in fact, that we've already made in over the last year or so, since the start of lockdown, as well as details of future events, talks, walks, and films that are rapidly percolating behind the scenes, and they're going to be on the website, the Trust website, templebartrust.org, imminently, hopefully at least one of them by the end of next week. So as a lot of you know, we promote architecture, urban and landscape design in the square mile to a very wide public through our regular program of talks and tours. And equally important to us is our very active support and promotion, so support for and promotion of greater diversity in the architecture and the built environment professions. And we address this as part of our online talk series, and this will continue apace as things go advance during the autumn and into next year. And on that subject, we're going to be returning to live events in our home, Temple Bar on Paternoster Square, from next Easter. This wonderful architectural gateway to the city, designed by Sir Christopher Wren and managed by the Trust, is also home to our associated worshipful company of chartered architects, of which I am a liveryman, yes indeed. And we really look forward to activating this special space for in-person events, meetings, dining and entertainment from the late spring. So today I am really delighted that we're kicking off our splendid series of autumn online talks with an event that's exploring the compelling art and science of community gardens and urban farming. And so I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker today, Tom Kendall, Associate Director of Wayward. Wayward is a landscape art and architecture practice based in London. It's an award-winning collective of designers, artists, and urban growers. And since 2006, that's a considerable length of time, Wayward has pioneered new methodologies in the creative use of underutilised land and meanwhile spaces. They're transforming derelict sites into large-scale design-driven spaces that engage local communities and inspire local and international audiences. So in his talk, People in Place, as it's called, Tom is going to tell us about Wayward's community engagement and design strategies for innovative new social, cultural, and economic models, realizing sustainable green spaces such as Farmopolis, an ambitious new urban farming concept, bringing together food, farming, arts, and culture. The Urban Physic Garden, which is a garden of medicinal plants, promoting the healing power of plants and food as medicine. The House of Wayward Plants, a plant adoption scheme that rehomes thousands of plants each year. And the Moor Lane and Union Street community gardens, the first one in the City of London as part of the Culture Mile and the other one in Southwark. So as Associate Director, Tom has worked with Wayward for over a decade, leading on the design and project management, while overseeing production, creative workshops, and community engagement. Born and raised on a farm in Cornwall, he went on to study fine art at Falmouth College of Art and architecture at the Bartlett School of Architecture and the Royal College of Art. So as well as leading Wayward's design team, he also teaches design studios at Middlesex University and the Bartlett, and he conducts personal research and workshops on the role of storytelling and writing in architecture and design. So please put your questions to Tom in the chat box, and we'll tackle them for you in a bit later on after his talk. So we're very excited to hear what you have to say and present today, Tom, and welcome to Temple Bar Trust. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much to Lucy. It's very exciting to be here, and hopefully we'll be able to attend some of the real live ones when they kick start again. Can't wait to come down and see. 2 seconds, I'm just going to share my screen. Come on, technology. Share. Okay, hopefully that's all green and ready to go. So my name's Tom, Associate Director of Wayward, and as Lucy so beautifully introduced, we are a landscape art and architecture practice that have been working on green spaces and exploring our passion for them for more than a decade now. Basically, ever since I left university, I've had my head stuck in a planter somewhere across the city and surroundings. I thought for this talk, if I give you a little intro to Wayward, sort of talk you through a few of our projects, and then sort of end up on a bit of a case study on one that we've been doing in the city recently. So our first sort of little step into intro is Wayward started as a plant adoption scheme, as an art project. 13, 14 years ago now, Heather, my colleague, saw a plant flying out of somebody's window in the streets in New York and saw it smashing across the ground. And she went and picked it up and secretly listened in on the drama that was happening above her, and realized that there must be hundreds, thousands of discarded plants all over the world that had similar sad stories and associations. And so she started to gather many of these discarded and unwanted plants together and posed the question to people if they were a good plant parent, and essentially put these plants up for adoption, thus sort of creating an active exchange between people and plants. We asked people to fill out an adoption form. They had to prove to us via a drawing or a piece of storytelling or writing how good a plant parent they were going to be. And only if they met our extremely exacting criteria would we give them a plant in exchange. And over the years, this adoption strategy has become really key to everything that we do at Wayward. These small acts of exchange created a whole methodology for us, where we realized that a lot of people don't just love plants, but they open up, they talk, they engage with you in a very different way. When you're talking to them about their green spaces, about their plants, they tell you the most intimate sort of details of their lives when you're talking about their gardens. And it's a great way to start to understand people and how people use their spaces. And so we've taken it from doing single individual plants that have been discarded to much larger scale events now. And so our newest I say newest, it's been running for 6 years now, but we now do this on a scale of thousands of plants every year. So we take plants from Chelsea Flower Show and from Hampton Court Flower Show, and we give them to schools and community gardens all over London and the surrounding area. And I think in the last 6 years, we've done nearly 70,000 plants to just over 300 different schools and community gardens all across the city, and also establishing some long-term relationships with many of these, which has been very exciting. We run it as a volunteer scheme, so people sign up and they join in and they come down to Chelsea Flower Show and Hampton Court, and the very gung-ho attitude, actively sort of engage in helping us collect and then distribute all these plants to people all over London. And we are hoping to be back there at Chelsea this year as well, fingers crossed. But here you can just sort of see some of the different people that we've had over the years. And we do this at 2 scales as well. So as well as giving them directly to schools, we also do smaller scale plant exchanges still, where we had quite the shock when suddenly 1,000 people descended on a park within 1 hour just to get a plant from Hampton Court. It was quite intense. We were expecting maybe 100 people. We thought, oh, you know, a little advert in Time Out will gather a little bit of interest, but no, we had 1,000 people who came down one morning and descended on a National Trust park in South London, all to fill out adoption forms forms and talk to us about how much they love their gardens and how much they love their plants. And we fully took over this incredible space and created a wonderfully joyous event. And so this active exchange, this active giving is sort of it was how we started. And then we were very lucky. Somebody at the London Festival of Architecture many years ago gave us, I guess, the kick we needed, the boost. They gave us our first opportunity to turn this notion of exchange into a genuine landscape project. And so our first project ever as a duo, as me and Heather, as a landscape architecture practice, was the Union Street Urban Orchard. And this was a project that was about regenerating a disused site down in South London near London Bridge. And we wanted to create a space that was a garden, a space of exchange between the festival, the London Festival of Architecture, and its local residents. We initially wanted to use the orchard typology. It's a very familiar typology to many people, but we thought it would be really interesting to do this in a very unfamiliar place. To give certain levels of familiarity, we divided the garden into a series of garden sheds. So we had the garden pond, we had a seed library, we had a scrumping shed, what else? We had a tea shed, and then the classic little garden shed full of tools and exciting paraphernalia. So we wanted to have these sort of anchors that allow the community to understand the project beyond just the orchard and allow them to engage with it. So this is how we filled the site. As a series of rows of pallets, all of which were donated. We produced this whole project for £23,000, with Heather and myself working at 14p an hour for the entire summer, which was a fun thing to work out at the end. But the whole site became incredibly rich. It was the full labour of love. We had 85 fruit trees of, I think, 12 or 13 different varieties, a host of other plants, some of which we bought specifically for the project to allow a level of edibility, some of which were donated, many from local residents. The site also became a host for a series of other projects. So in the background here, you can see a thing called The Nest, which was a bunch of Helsinki design students from the Finnish Institute who'd created this amazing contemporary steel structure, timber structure. We had a Bartlett student project here, which was all about kids engaging with their city. So this whole site became a repository for other projects. And I think that sort of, ever since this project, What Wayward has seen ourselves as is a platform. Yes, we're designers, we're an architect and a landscape architect, but overall what we are is a collaborator, facilitator space. We create these platforms that allow other designers, artists, illustrators, filmmakers, graphic designers, gardeners, guerrilla gardeners, activists, play designers, all to inhabit the same space. It's a really good way of checking your egos at the door and having to allow a whole amazing group of people into one space. And so here you can see this whole project as well was created by volunteers. So we had, I think this summer, I taught about 100 different volunteers how to use just basic timber tools so that they could help us construct, paint, decorate, erect, and we even gave a lot of them a lot of autonomy as well. So we had a few volunteers, like this lovely man up a ladder, I think his name was Paul. He came back every day for 3 weeks on a 6-week build, which was incredible that he gave up so much of his time. But by the end of it, we basically would hand him a sketch and he would walk up a ladder and make something for us, which was an amazing thing for us to sort of be able to do. And it created this really interesting sense of exchange where we would be teaching people skills, gathering plants together, and then having this fantastic set of conversations where we would start sketching and designing and working with people live on site. We basically came in with a plan that was 4 rows where we wanted to place the trees, and the whole rest of the project just gradually evolved out of this very simple master plan that became a conversation tool with everybody else on site. Ooh, something weird's happening with my mouse there. We're gonna move on. Okay, so yeah, this is the other great part about this is it created a gardening community. So because we were working there for 6 weeks building, we got loads of other amazing people coming into the area, loads of residents who were overlooking the site. And every day they would start to come down, have conversations with us. And by the end of the summer, we'd created this collective of gardeners in the area that helped us maintain the site as well. So these are some people that are sort of following me with our many wheelbarrows back to site with lots of plants. So we created this wild community. So on the notion of other designers and facilitators coming in, collaborators coming in, we love to fill these sites full of information. So you can just walk into every project we do and you can walk around it like a beautiful garden. But if you look a layer deeper and then a layer deeper again, there are these amazing layers of information built in. So one of the things we did was have a newspaper that was a giveaway on the garden that was full of stories and recipes written by my mum, because we get everybody involved in these projects. So all written by the local community and other writers in the area, that allowed us to tell loads of local stories all about the different plants and species that we had in the garden. And this newspaper became a great repository for a collaboration between us as landscape architects and a graphic designer. And the next slide. So I think my images might be really high res and so being a little slow. Okay, and so the next project is the Spice Exchange. This was at Kew Gardens. So this was a theatre space that we designed partly in collaboration with Kew themselves. And then when it came to the events, we collaborated with lots of different community leaders in the area to develop an event series that basically followed the spice trails from east to west. So we were exploring cultural communities, diversity, all within the sort of the notion of food. And so this theatre, this pavilion, housed within its walls, I think 30 different spices, all collected in the jars. So people would come in and start to identify and physically observe what these things were, and then tell us stories about the different spices that they use and how they use them, and give us their recipes and their remedies. And so we've actually got, I think, somewhere in a box, and we've got about 500 of these recipes that one day someone will helpfully fund us to make an amazing book out of, because all of these stories that we've sort of collected from this became a fantastic sort of wealth of knowledge, and people would come and start photographing them and swap them and exchange them, and we'd see them all over Twitter and Instagram, sort of being fed to people. But that was only a small part of the curated events that happened at the core of this space. This was filled with music and food and theatre all summer long, to sort of create an enriching environment. We didn't just want it to be a series of lectures, a series of talks. Everything that we did in this space had to have something physical and something engaging at its core, whether it was a taste or a sound, something that would actively provoke people in some way. And we really did. We traveled from east to west, so we had and highlighting a different spice across the globe. So we had these amazing events with a huge breadth of diversity, all just around the act of sharing food. Then the next project is one of our babies. This is the Urban Physic Garden. So this project is all about health and well-being, food as medicine. We wanted people to sort of step into this space and feel better. And so one of the ways that we sort of started to do this when we were coming to designing this space was to divide the whole garden up into hospital wards, so that as you walked in, you were greeted by the dermatology ward, the respiratory ward, the gastroenterology ward, so that you could navigate what otherwise looked like a really lovely garden and start to understand and pick the garden apart to see its relevance, its usefulness within your own body, and how our relationship with plants has evolved over centuries, and our understanding of plants has evolved over centuries as well. Again, this was also a great chance for us to collaborate with other designers. This one's slightly different to the way we did with the orchard. Here we were working with sculptors and artists. So we worked with Anna Garforth, who was this amazing sculptor typographer who created a giant moss cross for us. She was very interested in moss as a sort of dermatological skin healer. And so she created this beautiful pharmacy cross for us. We worked with Rambling Restaurant, who were food makers. They converted an ambulance into a cafe, and they were using a lot of the food that we produced within the garden to create beautiful feasts and sort of daily food events throughout the whole of the summer. So they became essentially a host for the site. So, and actually we also had a host at the Urban Orchard. Both these projects hinged on the fact that we had somebody on the site all summer long, able to engage and activate with people. We also had Luwat, who were a young tech company interested in poo and how to convert food waste and human waste into electricity and biogas. So every couple of weeks we went down to the site and we'd have breakfast cooked using biogas from this amazing anaerobic digester. And these guys now, a decade later, have gone on to basically sort of, I think they're currently installing giant versions of these systems across Africa. They're doing amazingly wonderful things, but it's great to know that we were able to sort of give them this sort of kickstart because we were so willing to say yes to layer in these different aspects of a project into our platform. We also had seesaws from the Venice Biennale that year by SCART. We had a ping pong table in a skip by the artist Oliver Bishop Young, who does wonderful things with skips. Again, we were trying to create this sort of very coherent atmosphere, but with all of this sort of enriched environment layered into it. We also hosted events all summer long as well. So we had an opera written for the project. We had theatre written for the project. We had artists like Sam Lee come down and do events every other week. So we were constantly activating the site to draw people in and to help them sort of navigate the space. So it isn't just a place you can come and learn about plants, although if you wanted to, we hosted GP surgeries for plants every Sunday, but you could also come here and be entertained and fed. Let's see if this is moving. Okay, next one is Queenswalk Window Gardens. I'm going to skip through because I realize I'm talking quite slowly. So this is the Queenswalk Window Gardens, which is a series of micro allotments that we dotted down the South Bank. We created 8 of these rooms, each of which responding to a specifically different type of the vegetable family and salad families. So you could go in and see a whole grouping, a whole family of plants living together in one room, as well as all of these beautiful sort of little window boxes dotted through the space. We wanted it to look a little bit like, I guess, like a series of little tower blocks filling the South Bank. And this project was visited by 8 million visitors. So we had an amazing sort of footfall of traffic of people engaging and interacting with these herbs and spices and vegetables and cauliflowers and lettuces all summer long, creating a really wonderful edible environment that was looked after by different local businesses. So all the businesses just across the pathway were all helping to look after this. And then at the end of it, all of these allotment rooms were given away to local schools and community gardens in the area, as well as all of the window boxes given to local residents. And that's a really important thing as well about all of our projects that we've done that's ever been temporary. Every single aspect of them has been given away. So to go back to the Physic Garden, every plant, every structure, every piece of wood was given away at the end of it, helping to create a whole new load of community gardens in the area. With the Urban Orchard, all the trees, all the plants, again, were given away. We seeded another, I think they went to form 8 micro orchards all over Southwark. So every single one of these projects has had a second home or has a legacy built into it. And that's from the start, that we go into all of these projects with an output where we know there will be a legacy of some kind. So now into the city, diving in a little bit. We had our first relationship with the city and with Culture Mile but when we did the Smithfield greenhouse. So Culture Mile is the City of London's cultural district. It stretches from Farringdon to Moorgate, and it's made up of 5 founding partners with the City of London, Barbican, Guildhall School of Music and Drama, London Symphony Orchestra, and the Museum of London. And they've all come together to create this amazing, creative, vibrant community full of events and installations and artworks and dances and performances all across the square mile. And then within the Smithfield Rotunda Gardens, this is 2019, just before COVID, we were invited to come in and design a structure, and we were taking inspiration from the ironworks of Smithfield Market, and we were personally really interested in the Victorian plant explorers at this point, which was they had this eccentric craze that swept Victorian England, known as pterodomania or fern fever, and we kind of wanted to see if we could reinvigorate people with fern fever as a sort of a way of beginning to, and fern fever, we specifically loved it because fern fever was a way where a moment where people were exploring the notion of environmental damage and becoming obsessed with green space again, all because of the damage that was being caused by the Industrial Revolution. They saw ferns, they saw plants as this sort of wonderful escape. Now, admittedly, many of them went on to wipe out several species because they got a little bit too crazed and collected a few too many ferns, but at the same time they created this beautiful movement about people going out and collecting and creating and gathering stories and spaces all around ferns and green space. And so we sort of wanted to create one of these moments. It was this moment as well where they created the Wardian case, or as we nicknamed it, the Waywardian case, which was kind of the forerunner to the terrarium. And so I guess sort of being able to invite plants into your home in a new and different way. But we sort of jazzed it up. We covered it in dichroic film to help create a slightly shadier but also incredibly vibrant atmosphere within this garden. And again, this project was a collaboration with a whole nother load of artists and designers, because they then came into the space and hosted workshops all summer long around botanical illustration, collage making. So these were all workshops specifically targeting a lot of local workers and residents to get them out of their homes, to get them out of their workspaces and into green spaces, so that they would start to actively engage with them. We also did the Beastly Street Party that summer, where we worked probably with about 2,000 children in one day who came in and painted and painted and painted continuously, creating these amazing unlikely animals and improbable botany drawings, and they transformed the whole of the site. We did little tours and talks with them all about animals and vegetation in the site, and they then went back to their little painting stations and created these amazing cardboard and painterly megaliths that they were inspired by all these local habitats, by all the local flora and fauna. So it was amazing to see these fantastic creative outputs coming from what we would otherwise consider a relatively normal green space within London. And at the end of the summer, we also had another big plant giveaway. So we gave these plants away to local residents again, and they all came down as part of the National Park City campaign who collaborated with us to help us give these plants away to local residents. Which leads me on to the Moorland Community Garden, which we finished last year. And this was a very long process of community engagement. So we were invited, just as we were sort of drawing the previous project to a close, to come and meet a group of local residents who had formed this community group to oversee the greening of Moorland, which, as you can see from the next slide, it's sorely needed. It already has this beautiful little community garden tucked away very modestly in the side, and the residents wanted to see it spill out. They wanted to see it coming out into the street. And so the City of London and Culture Mile invited us down to work on this in two specific ways. One was to engage with that same residents group to help them achieve their dream, and the other one was to test the future proposal that's going to be on site in, I think, 2 to 3 years time. So there is a future proposal to green most of this street, even if it's in quite a small way, but there were problems with the proposal. A lot of the local residents didn't like it, so we were brought in to help test how we could improve and enrich the future proposal, because essentially it looked like any other space in London. It could have been designed for anywhere. When you looked even at the drawings, you couldn't even tell that the Barbican sat in the background. It really could have been any city, probably anywhere in the world. So we wanted to make sure that there was a genuine sort of site specificness and something that really came out of the community when we approached this project. So we had lots of conversations with these people. And what was great is that very early on, we realized that not so great with pen and paper, but amazing talkers. So we had lots of discussions over cups of teas with the local residents to draw out of them what they wanted. So when it came to actually doing our first design conversation with them, we came to them with an almost sort of fully formed idea with lots of proposals. So we started being able to present them with planter designs really quickly. We showed them infographic designs. We talked to them about how the planters could also be SUD systems as a way of testing the future SUD systems that were going to be built into the site. We were able to layer all of these sort of their questions and their stories into a proposal very, very quickly, so that they could then, instead of having to sit there and awkwardly collage something or draw something that they didn't really know what to do, they could critique this with us and have a conversation about the design in a much richer way that was much more specific to them. If we'd have thrown them in at the deep end with pen and paper, they probably would have floundered. But this was a great way of having really rich and interesting design conversations, right down to the nitty-gritty of how to cast in a Culture Mile logo and where to put it. We could get into this really, really fast. So we presented this to them, and as well as some sort of like rough sketch visuals of how it might start to look on site. And then we pulled out again and we showed them a map of their whole area, and we started to draw on it the routes, the most familiar ways that they approach the space. So they started to fill this with little doodles and drawings of how they see a space and how they want to see is where they'd love to see greening. We then zoomed in a little bit and we gave them a physical map. We gave them essentially like a battleground, and we gave them lots of toys to play with on it, and they started to create these green forts all up and down the street. And this became a live conversation. For about half an hour, we were just moving around these different blocks and toys to position trees and discuss where it would go and why it would go there and why they stand there and why they want to look at these things in that way. And it became this fantastic debating session where we were then turning these blocks into the planters that we'd just shown them and discussing what that would look like from this angle. And then we went into a drawing exercise where we started to get them to draw over the existing site. Hopefully the image will come up. Oh, gone too far. Just go back one. And then we started to get them to draw over the existing sites. They started to draw our planters in, but then they started to add a whole new layer. They started to add storytelling. So in the bottom here, you can see this idea of like a written timeline drawn across the site, how they want to see trees in different spaces, how they want to green, not just this street, but up and beyond into the Barbican even further. So it took a while, but through this sort of notion of conversation and then this model and the map, and then finally going into drawing, we were able to have a really rich conversation. And I'd like to say that was the last conversation, but there were many, many, many more that happened after that. We showed them many different planter designs and loads of different shapes and forms, all of which came out of the local area, the history. We specifically looked at a lot of the Barbican plans to draw out very specific forms and shapes to create these so that the residents of both Heron Tower and Willoughby House or in the Barbican could understand where they'd come from and be familiar with them as well, because that's a really important thing we find for communities. There needs to be a familiarity sometimes so that they can visually understand their way into a project. And just to, is it gonna appear? Come on, technology. Ooh, too far. And too far again. And just to sort of get a sense of how many conversations we had, this was revision number 32 of a plan by the sort of time we got to a final conversation, which was to this one. So we eventually ended up on this plan, which was to a sort of extended garden room while still facilitating pedestrian traffic. We had these lovely planters all at varying heights. We were reflecting the Barbican, the upside down arches of the Barbican in these right way up arches within the structure. And then COVID hit, boom. And we were like, oh, it's all going to go on pause just for a second, but it didn't. Instead, every week we continue to have conversations about this project, and we continue to evolve it, even in like tiny and small ways to improve it. And we continue these conversations with the City of London, with Culture Mile and with the community until we sort of resolved it down to this final version of the project, which is this. Ooh, gone the wrong way again. And So we created these huge concrete planters. We're very keen for it to have not just a material relevance to the Barbican, but also something that had a legacy enforced in it from the start, not something that was easily discardable. So all of these planters at the end of this project are going to be forklifted off into into the gardens in the areas. So they're going to be donated and given around. So there is going to be this continued legacy again for this project. So it's not just easy to do with a few trees and some timber pallets, but you can even do it with giant concrete planters. We wanted to make sure that was built in from the start, and that was also really important to the community. They didn't want a temporary greening project that then didn't have great longer term ambitions. They wanted to see it built in right from the get-go. And all of these colours that you can see in the project as well, they are all coming straight from the Culture Mile branding. So we've worked very closely with Culture Mile, who've developed this brilliant, fun colour palette for the whole of the area. So we had this very interesting layering of community, City of London, Culture Mile, greening experts, all coming in for these fantastic conversations, all to lead up to this final project. We even, to get that slightly sort of Barbican rough texture aesthetic, we used a contemporary version. So where they hand carved the entire facades, we acid etched into the concrete to sort of peel away the surface to create these beautiful sort of textures that revealed the aggregates that were also used in the original Barbican structures. I'm just going to flick through a little bit to get to the next tiny section, because we also worked with a poet. So that story trail that the community had asked for from the beginning gradually evolved over our conversations with them to become a poem that was then written into blue panels that you can now see in the structure if you go to the site. There's even a very beautiful reading online that Kit has done of the whole poem. She worked with the local community as well, with a whole group of different residents, not just our garden residents, but with a wider group, to create this beautiful 8-stanza poem that's all about people's relationships to green space and how they see themselves within them and within the city. And then there's the fun bit at the end, which is the engagement and the consultation side of it. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to sort of see, because I guess the general public don't often get to see the results of this. And I thought it'd be quite fun to show. So we've built this project, but the whole point of this project is to have people's opinions. We wanted to see what they thought. It wasn't just about an engagement strategy to build the project. It was about the engagement strategy after the project was built. And so these are a few of the selected comments, mostly the nice ones in this slide, I'll admit, about how people responded to the project and what they also wanted to see as a result of it. This project was a catalyst or a spark for what people wanted in their future scheme. These are some of the other positive ones. So like highlighting things like the link to the Barbican. Ironically, many people want a place to sit, a very common contention across residents in the city. Some people want a place to sit, many people don't. Even more greenery, lots more greenery. That was one of the main ones to take away. And then a few of the negative ones, because it's really important to balance out the positive with these negative ones. Things like the colours, ironically, were critiqued quite heavily. They didn't quite like the boldness. They thought it was jarring in relation to the Barbican, and that it detracted from the planting. So these are all comments that then got taken on board and built into hopefully what's going to be the next stage. It's just one of those lovely word diagrams of what people really, really love to see. So when we took all the questionnaires, we went through and counted up all the key words, and green and trees and even fun was in there as the most common words of what people wanted to see specifically on this street. I bet you this is going to be slightly different for every single street in London. Will have similar but slightly different and very unique characteristics to something like this. Where is it going now? One sec, just going to go back a slide. And then this is what we sort of presented eventually to the current landscape architects for it. So it's a few key suggestions that we took from all of our conversations over nearly 2.5 years around this project. So I know it looks like such a small project, but it has essentially been 2.5 years of really long and really enjoyable conversations around green space that has boiled down to 7 bullet points about what might be done for a future scheme. But every single one of these as a result has been incredibly clearly thought about by us and by the community and by the clients as well. It's become this amazingly intricate conversation. And so I wanted to just sort of end finally on this image, which I showed you at the start. So this for me kind of sums up, I guess, where I kind of want to see people and place in our future. It's a sort of sign of collaboration, of volunteering, of learning, of burying your face in plants, of understanding what green space really is and what it's for and how we should be investing in it, all the different disciplines that come together and all the different people working together to kind of make it happen. Something full of creativity and life and collaboration. It's very sort of easy to get hold of a lot of tires and pallets and soil and seeds, but in sort of creating a space like hopefully the ones that I've shown you, you would agree that these take a little bit more love and a little bit more investment. And we think that the key to this investment is education and engagement, getting people actively engaged as well as passively engaged in their environment and understanding what might happen if it undergoes some serious changes in the possibly near future. And this kind of goes for every kid in school, every pedestrian, every parks team, project manager and local MP and architect and landscape architect. And I guess what I sort of want everybody to eventually become, probably in the near future, is really a better plant parent. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Tom. That's incredible, brilliant stuff. Really fascinating, and I think we're really happy that you presented this treasure trove of stories. Based around the acts of exchange. It's very generative. It's like a generative ecosystem, each single project. And co-creation is much more common now, whether it's landscape, meanwhile, architecture, or whatever discipline it is. And it seems to me that, the negative, ironically, one of the negative comments that was pointed at, made with regard to more gardens was, oh, that particular space here is non-specific, i.e. generic, and therefore the implication is it needs to be a lot more bespoke. And I think being bespoke is absolutely at the heart of co-creation. And you seem to have really hit the right tone, I think, with the layers and the weaving in of so much value, in order, as you say, the inclusive repository, enabling the creation of a really authentic legacy that people feel they've got a sense of ownership of. So please, anyone in the audience, if you'd like to put a question to Tom, please act now and put it in the chat box, and we will move on to it in a second. But there's so many questions percolating in my head, and you already answered one of them, because I was very curious to know over what period the gestation of the Moorland project was. And wow, incredible 2.5 years, I can well imagine. So community gardens with food growing are so badly needed, even more so now, post-pandemic, in UK's cities and towns, as people are really seeking to support their physical and mental health, keep their food costs get down, and find valuable means to collaborate with their neighbours. And I visited a fantastic food growing community garden in Waterloo with a colleague, a client from Lambeth Council yesterday, that she showed me, where each person or couple's plots, all their names indicate where their plots are, they're radiated out from a central arbour where apparently participants together, and maybe not all of them, have a weekly meal, to which I've actually been invited in the near future, which is really such a valuable experience beyond the confines of people's individual dwellings. And we've all seen probably too much of our own homes during lockdown, as much as we're grateful to have a roof over our heads. What is your take on the growing value of community gardens now? And there are also the main challenges of setting them up and maintaining them, which are obviously range from the social to the operational to the economic.
Oh, there's so many challenges for community gardens. The main thing being time and money, I think, for a lot of people. It's why we set up the House of Wayward Plants, so that we could, even in our small way, try and actively support them with donations as often as possible. One of the big things that people sort of forget is efficiency on space. and actually just going back to like a really simple allotment measurements. Like if you pick up any good old school kind of almanac, there's some really great basic guidance in there to sort of create highly productive spaces. But other than that, actually something like that radial system that you suggested that has quite literally a meeting space at the core is really valuable, but the key is to not let it overpower a space. And we've done a couple of projects in the past that we found mistakes on, where we put too much emphasis on event space and not enough emphasis on growing and on sort of micro moments. So it's in a way why allotments are such wonderful spaces, because of the classic allotment shed. Because yes, it is a very personal space, but it's still a space to invite somebody into. So even we've noticed allotments nowadays where they're, and like community gardens where they're sharing beds. Mm-hmm. So it might be one bed for 2 or 3 families because they don't have enough time to do all of it. But that act of sharing is becoming really important in the notion of exchange. But also, like, similar to the way we design a space, are willing to check your ego at the door. And if there's a cauliflower that day when somebody's there and picks it, it's because it's ready to pick that day, and maybe not for the next person. But people have to understand that these things are very cyclical. I would love to. I'd love to do more with the community gardens as well, and actually get House of Wayward Plants even bigger. We're sort of gradually over the next couple of years, we're hoping to look for funding to turn it into a year-round effort. So it's not just for the shows. It becomes something where we start targeting supermarkets, other growers all over the country, because the amount of plants that go to waste daily is slightly tragic and could probably feed an awful lot of people. Even if you just consider the lettuces that get thrown out from a supermarket on a sort of weekly basis, there's enough fibre in there to help an awful lot of people. So we're hopefully, if we can target the right people, we will hopefully be able to support a few more community gardens than we already do.
Yeah, we've got 2 audience questions, but I'm very tempted to ask you a question that came into my mind. Do you know, incidentally, whether the GLA's Good Growth Fund, which I know has funded a number of wonderful projects, are community gardens eligible for such a fund? They do match funding, don't they?
Yeah, that's the tricky bit, is finding match funding. So we very cheekily went for a match funding bid once, and the trick is to include people's time in it. That's the best way, of course, to get the match funding for anybody that hasn't tried that one yet. And so because raising money to match fund is actually incredibly difficult in cold hard cash. So being able to count donations and labor has been a valuable effort. When it depends on what the project slightly is with the community garden. One really easy way to help, though, is to quite literally get a designer in to collaborate with you, even in a small way, just sort of helping you begin to understand and lay your space out. Because actually, like I said earlier on, anyone can get a load of wood and soil and put it down, but doing it efficiently and to the best knowledge of that community actually takes a whole nother level. It actually takes a moment of separation from the community to be able to go in and almost mediate a space. So I would actively encourage people to seek out designers, not just me. There are other amazing designers doing community work out there, who, give them a couple of £100 for their time, but it will be the most valuable couple of £100 you'll spend on being able to get much better funding and creating a much better space.
Certainly will be, yes, definitely. So Jane Brodie has got 2 questions. So one of them is, so the first is, what have all these great projects taught you, do you think? And how have you changed your practice and your design approach and strategy over the years?
That is a painful question, Jane. It's really good. So when we started Wayward, we were very young and very naive, and that first project, the orchard one, like I said, we did it on £23,000, and we were paid 0.14p, 14 pence for an hour for that whole summer, which was amazing to do. But I think one thing that we've learned from all of our projects is our value and our worth, actually, and the way that, and what we've learned has a sort of value to the communities. And my favorite project overall, probably, that taught us that is the House of Wayward Plants, because it's those moments of conversation with every community garden and with every school. And it's really funny that it's the one part of our project that isn't design related in a way. It's the conversational aspects that have become the most important and the biggest learning curves for us as well. In architecture school and landscape architecture school, you're taught an awful lot of things. What you're not taught is how to talk to a community.
Certainly true. Yes, so true.
And it's one thing that teaching now we're trying to address in many, many ways. We now make it an active part of our curriculum if we can. Obviously, this year has been a bit difficult on that front. But starting up on this new academic year, we're getting our students involved in community projects and speaking to people, having a live client instead of just a fake one, so that they learn how to have a conversation and negotiate. And so, yeah, I think over, 14 years now, the biggest thing that's changed has been conversation and how we have it, and then the impact that that has had on our design.
That's really good to hear, and that is so central now to the ethos of architectural education in a multidisciplinary sense, because it also helps to strengthen the foundations of the legacy, because ultimately the spaces need to be there's such huge social value, health value, economic value to people feeling that they are actively part of whatever it is, and they can take it forward themselves and be stewards of the ground as well. So Jane's other question is, which of your temporary projects, because you showed a fair number of beautiful temporary projects, do you think you'd like most to develop into a permanent structure, and where would it work best if it were to go from temporary to permanent status?
I mean, all of them, but if I had to pick one, the one that is our baby is the Urban Physic Garden. It was one, it's our second big project. It's always had a close baseline, and it's not that far from the orchard in itself in a way. But the Urban Physic Garden is also a project that we have pitched for the last 10 years in about 7 other sites all over the world, always with funding pulling out just at the last minute. Just before you even think you're about to crack ground, kind of thing. So we would love to see the Urban Physic Garden somewhere, so much so that we've actually turned it deliberately into a charity. We have been collaborating with various other artists, designers, medical herbalists off of our own back for the last decade to keep the conversation rolling, because we think that notion of food as medicine and having that at the core of a green space is brilliant, because it doesn't, it feeds you, but it does so much more than that. That whole notion of wellness within green space, whether it's down to food or physical activity, is incredibly important. So that's our baby. And where would it work? Again, the lovely thing about the notion of the medicine and the way we treat food is that it is cultural. It is multivarious. It exists everywhere. Every culture has its own sense of a physic garden. And so I could see it working in so many cities, in so many towns all over the world. Specifically a city, it is definitely key for a city, I think, to pull that in. I was lucky enough to do a talk in Korea, in Seoul, and the way that they do urban agriculture and create gardens is all around food doing you good. And to the point where they even have I think they still have an urban agriculture minister to oversee how our cities evolve in a green way, specifically around food production and how people behave with that. And I think that's incredible. So maybe they could invite me back. I'd love to do one in Seoul. That would be stunning.
Yeah, fantastic. So I can't quite believe, are you, am I right in saying that no one internationally in cities has yet taken you up on that?
Not on the Urban Physic Garden, sadly. We've managed to do a few projects abroad, but sadly the Urban Physic Garden remains always on the edges of kickstarting.
I've got a few ideas about that. We're doing a project in the country. Let's talk further about that one.
Love to.
Yeah, definitely. So so far if anyone else has a question, please do now. It's like final minutes, so we've got just a small window of time for you to put your question to Tom. So let me see what else I've got written down, because I had my question about the timescale answered. When you're doing co-creation, and this is obviously we're talking about the very key element of architectural education that you're wishing to emphasize a lot more now. So when you're working on co-creation projects with residents, what would you say are maybe one or two of the key approaches to really absolutely avoid when you're working with residents? I mean, we've got a pretty clear idea of what you need to do to get it right, but there are some things that are going to take you down a rabbit hole, so to speak, that you really, whether you've got a small team or a large team, you should stay clear of, I think.
I guess learning some good mediation, very basic mediation and negotiation tactics is actually a really good one. Even the classic of getting people to name 3 things that they like about something, whether it's each other or a space, is a really good one. And then, because that's about handling people, but then the other one that we usually try and do, and it might sound like a bit of a cheat, but we usually do try and go into a project with a sketch. We go into a conversation with something a bit more tangible, and Moorland was a great one for helping prove that to us, that was a working strategy actually. So because it started out with the orchard, we went in there with just a plan, and then the whole project evolved like 3-dimensionally out of that one plan. We had no CAD models of it, we didn't even have any measurements, we literally went in with a sketch and built a project out of it. But I think going in with a key vision, a key sense of direction and vision, even before you've had a conversation, is a really good starting point. And obviously being willing to bend and understand that it might change, and you sort of navigate around that with the community, but having that key direction as a linchpin, because quite often what the community wants isn't say so on every detail and every element. Every person will have a specific moment that they want to take on. So if you come in with the umbrella, everybody else can find and perform on a spoke somewhere within it.
Great, fantastic. Do you see, you mentioned the National Park City organisation, and London is a national park city. It's a global organisation, isn't it? Do you see more scope? Do you see scope for more collaboration with such a kind of a pan-umbrella organisation, or would you at the same time strategically build up other new partnerships going forward in the next couple of years?
Always both, I think, with these things. There's something
and
like
macro to the micro scale.
Exactly.
Partnerships.
The National Park City is amazing, and they've been some great conversations and events that we've had. And for us, they've worked very well on an event level, because they've gathered voices, they've helped create conversation. We've been able to facilitate these moments of exchange and conversation around that. And I think that they're great for the sort of the big master planning elements. We at Wayward are probably less master planners. We are great facilitators and conversationalists. And even amongst Heather and ourselves, Heather is trained as a landscape architect. She's a big ideas. She can see a whole plan, like the overarching idea. I'm trained as an architect, so I come in and start to see detail. So then we sort of meet somewhere in the middle. And so even within, that's why we sort of work that way. That's why I would sort of carry on working that way. I think I like coming in and doing the nitty-gritty, micro, tiny conversations, and Heather is very good for the big overarching. So I see them both working very well. And it's how we're already starting to, I guess, attack with Wayward in a way. We're looking for loads of partners all the time to help push House of Wayward Plants, to help push the Urban Physic Garden out there, because we love having those individual conversations and adapting our projects and our practice to every community. I mean, the projects I've shown today are like a small range of what we've done, but we've done everything from these to a water slide for a summer school, and like all sorts of odd projects, to pop-up shops and things. And so every project has been so different. It's been such a learning curve, but it's always been about the people, of the clients that we've worked with, which has been the most exciting part, whether that is an event for National Park City or a bicycle powered water slide for a bunch of kids in America.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, you have immense flair as curators in the way in which you navigate and assemble and overlay the different links and layers of projects. And I would say that also, the narrative element is really, really formidable and greatly important. I wondered, have you been very consciously aware that you've inspired the teachers of the school children that have got involved in some of your projects? Have you shared techniques and approaches to narrative-driven placemaking?
I hope so, yeah. And every time we go into a school, we always leave them with a host of worksheets and thoughts and ideas to sort of take away. we always leave, whether it's we've done like oak tree growing workshops and like acorn collections with a school in Bearwood, down to imagining moon colonies and plant growings on Mars. And every time we've gone into a school, we've come in with an educational package and a strategy and a sort of workshop leaflet, so they're able to essentially autonomously do some of this stuff for themselves afterwards. And obviously we hope that they invite us back to keep the conversations going, because it's good for kids to have fresh faces and new voices coming in all the time. But if they're, for a lot of schools, they don't always have the budgets to do that sometimes. So we try and make sure that some people at least do have an autonomy to the work that we provide for them.
Well, that's wonderful. That's really rewarding. One of the very many rewarding facets of your work. So I think we will need to leave it there, because we've reached nearly almost 7:30. But I am so impressed and uplifted really by the fun and joyous kind of exchanges that you're facilitating. I think Wayward is a hugely valuable phenomenon that deserves to be better known. So now we have this video anyway that will be available on the Temple Bar Trust website, and also on our Temple Bar Trust's YouTube channel for anyone who missed the event afterwards. So thank you very much, Tom. It's been tremendous. And I'm going to have to, it's with great pleasure that I just very quickly, before we sign off, to flag up what's happening next. So on the 30th of September, our hardy perennial architect Eric Parry is back to talk to us with great pleasure, as he always is, shows about his architectural projects for livery companies in the City of London. So, for example, leather sellers and cloth makers predominantly. And on the 6th of October, that wonderful, illustrious architectural teacher, Neil Pinder, is joining us. And then thirdly, on the 21st of October, we're really delighted that we have Tara Bolade, founder of Bolade Design Studio. And they are, as of a few days ago, announced to be contenders for Young Architect of the Year at BD's Architect of the Year Awards 2021. So full details of these events are going to be on the Trust website very shortly. So be sure to check them out and sign up if you can. So once again, Tom, thank you so much. And we look forward to catching up with the Wayward experience somewhere very near us very soon and continuing to take benefit from it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Fantastic. So bye, everybody, and see you again soon. Bye, Tom.
Fantastic. Thank you.